if you're an osteopath, you were an original integrative medicine doctor. So when you hear about integrative medicine, how I got involved was at Meridian Health, the sleep doctor, and they had a donor that told the hospital that they wanted to donate $7 million for their integrative medicine program. So, of course, like if you're going to donate $7 million for integrative medicine, to the CEO, suddenly mushrooms look really good. And so he didn't know what integrative medicine was about, but he was buying into it for $7 million. And this individual came and said, well, I have a sleep problem. And they said, don't you worry, we'll have you see our sleep expert. And so I knew nothing about integrative medicine. And I get invited to go out to lunch with this woman, and she starts going on about this integrative medicine. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And I start researching it. So this was back in 2011, 2010. And I'm like, well, this is very interesting. And it just so happened that they were having the American Board of Integrative and Holistic Medicine was the name of it at the time. They were having their conference, and every year they have them out in Paradise Point in California. And I thought, well, doesn't sound too bad. And I looked at the lineup of lectures, and I said, this is very interesting. And because I was doing the MBA, I was doing all this medicine, population health, and all the rest of it, I said, well, this is all of that. Right? So I go out there, and it became immediately evident to me. There's some elements of integrative medicine that I'm not quite sure yet myself that I understand it or that I would be comfortable promoting it, and that's okay. There's a saying: if you've seen one integrative medicine program, you've seen one. So to me, the point of integrative medicine is prevention and wellness. And it's prevention and wellness done in a way that's very cost-effective. And what I want to try and do for all of you is just open your eyes to the fact. And this integrative medicine is a big deal in terms of business opportunity for physicians, because everyone, the whole healthcare thing, we're shifting. So all the dollars. So one thing you need to understand about this Affordable Care Act. When the Affordable Care Act was signed into law, what it did effectively was brought laws to the table that are shifting, and that's why it's so painful right now for physicians. And if you're saying to me, my reimbursement is the same, happy day, I'd say, who's your accountant? You need a new one. Because what's happening is they're taking them, because we didn't have a health care system, we had a disease care system. We as clinicians do not focus on health. You're supposed to be focused on your own health. I'm here to help you when you're sick. But we can't think about it anymore. We have a role in helping people stay well. We don't want people to be patients. And we can't, like I said, we cannot continue like this. It's going to bankrupt the country. So what the Affordable Care Act is doing, it's making, I promise you, if you go out there and you go to some of these business meetings and conventions and lectures, they will out and out tell you they've decided to make it painful for us because pain creates change. So they're pulling the dollars out of the disease care system, the acute care system, and moving it all upstream to focus on prevention and wellness. So that is where the opportunity lies. It lies in the outpatient settings focused on prevention and wellness. So you can define prevention and wellness in a lot of ways, but what I want to do for you is just help you understand how critical this is to your future and why you would want to consider getting involved. And you don't need to be an integrative medicine doctor to understand these principles. You just need to be a doctor. It's really, really, really simple. So integrative medicine, at the heart of it, touches on this new principle. It's not really a new principle, but like anything else, 15 to 17 years, we're probably only 3 to 5 years into this. So you can wait another 10 years to discover epigenetics, or you can leave here and just do some investigating for yourself. What does this mean, epigenetics? It's a big, hot topic, and really it's about why your DNA is not your destiny. At Meridian Health, they're spending $150 million to build a new cancer center. They call it the Building of Hope. And of course, this is where I get in trouble, because I say, well, that's not hope. That's $150 million spent on bricks and mortar and managing disease. And there was an article that just came out in about 2 months ago, and I think it was in Nature, but I can't remember exactly. But the point of what I'm about to say is that if you focused on health and social determinants, 90% of cancers could be prevented. Because much of the debate of healthcare fails to point out that much of what we manage is chronic disease, and you already know that if we got people to change their behaviors around 5 determinants of health, and there's a list of social determinants, but 5 determinants of health, 80% of chronic diseases would be prevented. So this is the equivalent of we hire people to push around mops and spend money on mopping up water, and nobody's come upstream to turn off the faucet. Well, osteopaths are well positioned to turn off that faucet. And that's what epigenetics is all about. It's about turning off the faucet. So epigenetics redefines the meaning of the upstream approach. So I was talking about going upstream, doing health and wellness, getting a risk profile of somebody so that they knew exactly what their scorecard was. So when they entered into the healthcare system, they knew exactly what their needs were. They weren't getting unnecessary care, unnecessary tests. They weren't spending unnecessary costs. And no different than your credit report. We have a better understanding of our finances. You go get a financial advisor to understand your finances, but you wouldn't do the same thing for your health. So epigenetics redefines the meaning of the upstream approach and really made it crystal clear to the people that are in the space of epigenetics how important these very simple behaviors are. So epigenetics looks at our environment and these simple behaviors and how it actually influences and turns on and off genes that code for disease. And when we understand the epigenetics, what has to happen in order for us to really come upstream and make these changes, we need policies to come to the picture to really help with the discipline of epigenetics. The problem is very interesting. Many of the policies that get put in place from a government perspective, they're expecting a tremendous amount of us, like what we need to do to solve this whole healthcare crisis. But much of what gets put in place in terms of policy isn't even based on any real science. And we're in the knowledge age. We're getting to the point where, and if you read Harvard Business Review, I love it. It's a psychology manual. That's all business is. It's understanding how you manage humans and how you get people to collaborate and how you get people to connect. So eventually, I think we will get all these things solved because science is coming into play to tell us, so when you look at, if anybody remembers, Zuckerberg gave $100 million to Newark for education. There's a whole science around why that $100 million was wasted, and they could have predicted the waste based on human interaction, the science of how we interact with each other. And before they even spent $1, they would have known it was all going to go to waste. So again, we have to do a better job on both sides. So when it comes to your health, what we know is that your zip code may be more important than your genetic code. And this is really showing to be the case. And there's maps of the United States of America, and last night as I was looking through some of this material, there was one that just came out this month. It's brilliant. It just literally emphasizes this point. And when you go to the CMS website, where they have, because of doing the hot spotting, again, going out to the communities and doing these screenings, they can now identify areas in the country where you can see clearly the poor health in these areas, and it's directly related to some of these social determinants of health and health determinants. So what is epigenetics? Epigenetics says that your genes, and from when you're born, you have these genes, that your genes truly, whether they're turned on or off, is a matter of your very environment, and that you can change the expression of your genes simply by what environment you're in and by some very simple and basic behaviors and actions, turning on and off your genes. We used to think you have your genes and that's what they are, that you couldn't turn them on and off. You actually physically could say, start today and turn your genes on and off. and change the course of your, now you all know that. You all know exercise, be somebody different. But when it comes down to the molecular level, actually understanding that what you're doing is turning on and off your genes is profound. So epigenetics tells us that genes, that when they're expressed, they go through this, there's the promoter region, and you have the transcription of the genetic material. And what happens is there's a process called methylation, if you remember from basic science, and that process of methylation is what causes genes to be activated or inactivated. And that's the science of epigenetics. And the science of epigenetics shows us that these basic health determinants and your environment play a role in actually influencing, again, the turning on and off of the genes and how that DNA is transcribed. And you can see here, there's a multitude of things that we've identified that will actually play a role in turning on and off those genes. And in fact, it not only has an impact on your own genes, but studies have shown that when you turn on and off these genes by your environment or simple changes in behaviors, it doesn't just affect your genetic makeup. It affects genes of your children for generations to come, which is, again, brand new science, which has a profound impact on how we can make a difference in health and wellness and improve things for generations. So, you all know about stress. I'm sure you all know about stress. And I don't know if any of you have actually seen this stress performance chart. You're designed to exist in your environment and take on the challenges of the day. You have all the physiology you need. And, stress is not the problem. It's when you don't have the right mind frame to deal with the stresses that you have, the right tools. You think of the military. Think of what we have to do as physicians. I remember when I was an intern, we used to have the buddy system until you felt skilled and you could manage that situation. So what the science tells us is stress is always a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Change is always going to be uncomfortable because you're literally rewiring your brain. So change is going to be uncomfortable, but stress is a good thing because it helps you don't get any more neurons. You have the same ones that you've had since life, but you can rewire those neurons and create new connections, and that's what stress does for you. It helps you grow and challenges you to improve your performance. But you get to a point in time, so there's good stress, it's going to challenge you, and then there's bad stress, obviously, about that causes fatigue and exhaustion and breakdown. And that's what we need to avoid. But your response to stress, and you all know this, can be taught. And why that's important is because that's how we became who we are. Responding to our environment and the stresses that we were exposed to is the very point of this epigenetics. Those genes have the capability of turning on and off because it's necessary for you to be able to constantly adapt to your environment. And you think about adapting to your environment, we think about it that survival of the fittest. So this one over here that just didn't have quite the genetic makeup to exist in this environment died off, and the ones that did continue to thrive. But we know that that's not the case, that you have the capabilities of adapting to your environment from a moments to moments notice, and again, you can turn on and off your genes. So stress, you all know about the stress loop, I'm sure, but just to reiterate it, you can have stressful thoughts, which are perceived threats. It's not real. It's responding to emotions, your environment, and you have real threats. The only real threat you really have is if a lion is going to eat you, or there's some violence going to come your way. The rest of it is really perceived threats, because the reality is there isn't a single person in this room that is destitute and really needs to be stressed. Because what do you need to really be successful? I'll tell my patients when they're all stressed out, you need one fork. And what most of us are doing when we get stressed out, it's again, there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells you that it was the job of your parents to teach you to be able to depend on yourself for your basic needs, physiologic needs, water, food, air, shelter over the top of your head. And when you can't get that or a lion is about to eat you, that's a real threat. So if you're a vulnerable patient and you're sick, that's a real threat. There's a reason to be stressed. But if you're just stressed out because they don't like me, well, science tells you that 25% of people are either narcissistic or sociopathic, and they're never going to like you, so get over it. 30% of people are just trying to please everybody. and you got the 30% in the middle. So if you're on that Maslow's hierarchy of needs and status matters to you, and so there's status, right? There's self-esteem, there's membership, and there's sexual relations. Those are the social needs. And how important those social needs are what your parents taught you. So if your parents constantly said, don't do that, what are the neighbors going to think? Then you start worrying about what the neighbors are going to think. And then one day, if you come across that sociopath, and they just don't like you, because they just don't, now you got a problem because you have a threat. And what happens is you fall down to the next rung. You fall down to the next rung and they don't like you, and you're not really quite sure you like yourself. You don't know if you can depend on yourself. Oh my gosh, I just never got this right, and you have low self-esteem. Now let's face it, sooner or later all of us are going to feel a little challenged and stressed. But at that point in time, as far as the brain is concerned, that's a stress trigger. And if you don't think you could depend on yourself, then the next thing you fall down to is, oh my gosh, who are my peeps? Can I depend on them? And it just keeps falling down. Now, you move in and out. It's not necessarily that fluid up and down. But the point being is, those are all perceived threats. You only need one fork. I promise you, everyone in this room can depend on themselves. And the Janis Joplin song, Freedom, is nothing but, is another word for nothing left to lose. Once you're not afraid that you have nothing left to lose, what do I have to lose? It's amazing. You stop, you turn off that fear response. And I promise you, when you understand the dynamics of the brain, fear limits your ability to go from the left side of the brain to the right side of the brain. And I got so involved in understanding this just from the sleep perspective, but it's really fascinating. The left side of the brain limits the activity on the right side of the brain. It's like you have to reboot the computer to get over there. It's called the aha moment. There's unbelievable science around it. But the point being is, once you're in a state of fear, let me ask you something. If a lion came in here and he was about to eat us, I hope Michelina wouldn't throw me up for sacrifice, but but if I said to you, let's sit down and come up with a creative idea about how we're going to run away from the lion, you'd say, well, go ahead, you have your committee meeting over there, we're out of here. So when you are in a situation where you just need to move and you don't need to come up with something creative, that's the left side of the brain. It's like, let's just get it done. It's analyze. It's very analytical, concrete. We're not coming up with creative things. To get over the right side of the brain, being very creative, you can't be in a state of fear. And that's why for all of us right now, fearing like that the sky is falling and that the world as we know it is and we're having a conversation over here. Administrators are even more afraid than you, because the reality is 50% of administrators are going to lose their jobs over the next 5 to 10 years. So they're in a state of terror. So you're showing up complaining. We were talking about the data, and all they see is that you're looking at them like they're a juicy steak. And so it's stopping our ability to have conversation. But the point is, fear activates that physiologic response, and once that physiologic response is activated, you get this whole cascade. You know how it goes: the fight or flight response, that whole axis. But at a cellular level, it looks like this. And this diagram is just there to help you understand there's a tremendous cascade that ultimately lands on that genetic makeup. And that's where that methylation of that DNA comes in. And you can see inflammation. You've heard these words before. And there's the inflammaging now is the new word for how is it that you have people that are living till they're like 104, 110, and the rest of us are, it's all about that inflammatory process. And the inflammation is the immune system. It's coming to your defense. It's that activation of fight or flight. And when you activate that, the oxidative radicals and all the rest of it, it does damage to that DNA. It methylates it in a way that we're turning on and off genes. So again, just a very busy graph to explain. There's unbelievable details in science to understand how this whole process works and how stress and our environment is changing that genetic makeup. So, and when you think about how profound this is, 50% of visits to physicians, 60 to 90% of doctors' visits are related to stress. 50% of Americans report that they're stressed on a daily basis, and only 3% of those doctor visits really, how these are right, patients with depression, anxiety, drug addiction, all these things, people just trying to cope and not doing so well are incredibly hard to deal with because we don't understand the underpinnings. So stress-related healthcare visits are problematic, and what do we do about that? Well, this program, because again, I met this woman who was giving $7 million. Now, mind you, she disappeared off the landscape. So then what happened, to give you another little bit of tidbit information, the CEO had put down on his goals for 2015 that we would have an integrative medicine business plan. Now, when you're the CEO, and apparently when you put that down on your business plan and tell your board that you're delivering on it, apparently you have to deliver on it. So we had a bit of a pickle because now nobody knew what the hell an integrative medicine business program plan was. But here I was going about my day doing this MBA stuff, and I was having a ball. And I said, well, what the hell? I'm going to put together the integrative medicine plan for them. And I had so much fun doing it. I took all that business information and packaged it with this and found the Benson Henry Institute program up at Harvard. And I really encourage everyone in the room. They open their arms to anyone who wants to come. They have their classes online. Please go there and visit their website and start engaging in their classes and start using it in your office practice. Why? Their program is all about creating resilience, and they do it with meditation, mind-body approaches. I thought it was crazy, however. Went up there and saw it for myself, and what the science is showing with just these very, very simple healthcare practices, they looked at their patient population for a year that they engaged in mindfulness. And after a year, they found that they reduced healthcare visits for that group by 33%. And Harvard said, this can't be correct. You must go back and do it again. So they made them do it again. So they collected the data now over 4 years, and they just published the data this October. They reduced healthcare visits by 43%, not 33%. And you could go Google this, the data's out there, just with meditation and yoga. And so they do these mind-body approaches, and it was thousands of patients. It was 13,000 patients that they followed over 4 years that they did this mindfulness and yoga. And 13,000 in the entire control, and there was actually 4,000 in their patient population. But I mean, these are amazing results. And so just to look at, when you look at a glimpse of the MRI and what's going on when you have meditation, you can see it's no different than, slowing the breathing down and stopping the sympathetic nervous system, bringing on the parasympathetic nervous system. But these types of behaviors actually change the form and function, the structure of your brain, actually change your brain because of epigenetics. So you're changing the genes, you're turning them on and off, and so you're actually changing the whole structure of your brain. So we used to think, and you've all heard about neuroplasticity and all the rest of it, we used to think your brain was really locked in. We now know you're either in one of two states, that you're either in a locked-in state and you're sitting stagnant and maintaining the status quo, or you're growing and you're thriving, and your brain maintains the capability to grow and thrive and change and rewire up until the day you die. And that is possible to do that with some very, very simple behaviors like meditative practices. Now, I promise you, you could go to Barnes & Noble and you can get all kinds of books on meditation. You can get all kinds of books on vegetables and exercise and everything else. But when we're talking about an obesity epidemic and a society that is unbelievably stressed, then somehow, despite the fact that the information is there, no one's engaging in it. And all the stuff that I did with Dr. Oz, I would go on his show, right? And he would have me do, you know the show, he'd have me doing some crazy things. But, so I would go to Whole Food store, finding mushrooms, cherries, you name it. One day I'm in the store, and I would go over to this lady, I said, do you have any, I didn't even know what they were I was getting. Some of those Bing tart cherry thingies. And the lady goes, why are you getting those? Because it was local to where I was at the hospital. Why are you getting that, Dr. Ash? You're not going on that Oz show, are you? And I'm like, yeah. And she takes her microphone. She goes, Jim, we're going to have to order more of those cherries. Literally, I have the thing. And I'm looking at her. She goes, Dr. Ash, every time you go on that show, they come running in here, and we can't even keep the stuff on the shelves. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah, this is crazy. You have to tell Dr. Oz to stop. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. What hit me was, why is this so? Because no matter how you slice it, the way the mind works is, and this is true. Michelina and the rest of us ladies were standing there talking about how you could have somebody who's come up the ranks of administration, and we're standing there going, okay, really, seriously? And you're telling me what to do? But it doesn't matter. Once you give somebody that title, everybody assumes they have certain qualities and characteristics. So you could be the worst doctor on the planet, but once you're the doctor, people do what you say. So you could say, slather butter on your buns, and people would be doing that and thinking it was the greatest thing that ever happened. But what it told me was that as a healthcare provider, if I wasn't encouraging people, so I needed to put on a prescription, eat broccoli. I needed to endorse it. I needed to say to these people, go exercise. But there's physicians out there that realize that they can't just put it on the prescription. There's actually doctors out there that are going to restaurants with their patients en masse, taking all their diabetics and saying, let's go to a restaurant. Let's go Google it, I promise you. Dine with the doc. Walk with the doc. There's a whole national movement where the doctors come out on Saturdays and go walking in the parks with all their patients. And I promise you, in the next year or two, you're going to be seeing exactly those kinds of things. Because with those behaviors, you really can change your brain. So activity, there's a variety of ways that you can engage in activity, but just simply walking, you can see after 20 minutes of walking what it does when you look at an MRI and the changes in your brain. So you don't have to do a lot of activity, just simply walking can make all the difference. Nutrition, the same thing. When you understand how important nutrition is, nutrition and eating, you hear about people talking about eating the foods from the rainbow, right? And a little bit of a busy slide, but the point of this slide is how those elements in your food, if you could see there, all of those micronutrients are necessary for these DNA building blocks. So even the food you eat, and it matters what kind of food you eat, because if you eat organic foods, you're not exposing yourself to pesticides, and those pesticides will disrupt your endocrinologic system, and it interferes with this process. And the foods you eat, whether they're organic foods and whether they're those colorful foods, all make a difference in the ability for your DNA to be methylated or not, and will turn on and off your genes. So that's why when you hear all the people that are involved in integrative medicine, they're really all into fruits and vegetables. And you've seen this thing with Michelle Obama with the tomato. Does she not have anything better to worry about than a tomato? But the thing is, when you understand how important getting people to have proper nutrition is, it makes a difference. And you've heard about the gut microbiome. Well, that's critically important because that's where those micronutrients and where your immune system interfaces with your environment. And changing that microbiome, you need those bacteria in your gut to really have a robust environment, like the rainforest, so this whole epigenetic process can be working correctly. And studies show that if you've had a course of 7 antibiotics, it has a profound impact on this epigenetic process for generations to come. So you hear people talking about eating the rainbow. That's because all those different colorful foods, they're important for the micronutrients they have. And these newer programs that are coming, if this is true, imagine if you have a diabetic patient and you ask them what they're eating, but social determinants means that you'll actually go to their fridge and look in their fridge and ask, do you have food? So asking very simple things. Sleep is important too. You need 7 hours. The timing of sleep matters. And when you don't get the right amount, when you don't have the right timing, it increases the inflammatory markers in your bloodstream and it changes your genes, physically changes your genes. And we now believe that insomnia, when you have insomnia, it's a 24-hour-a-day hyperaroused state that's because of that epigenetics, the turning on and off of those genes, that actually make you more hyperaroused and actually change the threshold of the stress response. And so insomnia is not a nighttime disorder. It's a 24-hour-a-day disorder, no different than coronary artery disease is not a disorder because you walked up a flight of stairs. The disease is there all the time, and that's the stressor. So when people are trying to fall asleep at night, the dynamics are such that the hyper-aroused state comes out, and it's because of that epigenetics and the turning on and off of genes that code for the processes that are necessary for that hyper-arousal and the sleep. And if you're not getting good sleep, it impairs critical thinking, your judgment is impaired. Motor vehicle accidents. The greatest killer of teenagers is motor vehicle accidents. 50% of them are related to drowsy driving. Now Michelina said about all the media stuff I'm doing. Arianna Huffington's book just came out, The Sleep Revolution, and I was lucky enough, she's kind of befriended me, and I mean, I'm literally going to be flying around the country with her. She's partnered with Uber to get students a resource so that they don't have to drive drowsy, and it's the #1 killer of teenagers. So life purpose, I mean, you hear a lot about purpose. Some people say purpose is having your goals. Some people say it's like what you're here for. They get it all involved in a spiritual meaning. But we know, studies show that when you have a purpose outside of yourself, when you focus on unconditional kindness, benevolence, and love for others, it sounds all mushy, but it actually creates emotional stability. It helps you neurologically to be more courageous. And it really helps you to take on the challenges of the day, because when you don't have a purpose outside of yourself and bigger than yourself, it literally activates your brain in a way that threshold for the stress response changes. And again, it changes the very DNA, right back to epigenetics again. So you'll hear, coming forward, you're going to be hearing a lot about these health determinants, social determinants. Health determinants, quickly, what are they? There's 5 of them. There's been 5 of them that have been shown to have an impact on mortality and morbidity, and they are nutrition, activity, sleep, resiliency, and purpose. And the last one, there's actually truly 6. It's addictive behaviors. If we could solve those things, we would prevent 80% of the chronic diseases we're dealing with today. We would turn off the faucet simply with doing some of those things. So going forward, that's where the spotlight is going to be, on those social determinants. And the health determinants are, do you have the means to have food in your fridge? Do you have transportation? Do you have a safe home to live in? And what does that apartment building look like where you're living? Because if you're one of those people that lived in that apartment building in Camden that I talked to before, that was the cause of 90%, nearly all the hip fractures and all the costs at Cooper. So those simple things, just changing the carpet, made millions of dollars worth of differences. And so the Dean Ornish diet is now, if you're seeing patients, you want to look into this Dean Ornish diet, because it adds $86 to every visit that you see on a patient. If you become a certified provider of the Dean Ornish diet, it's paid for by CMS. Why? Because the screen that's up there is showing you the turning on and off of genes. That's what the extra green is, after engaging in the Dean Ornish diet. So we know that there's these factors now that will contribute to a successful lifestyle change, but it also comes down to understanding what drives behavior, and that's important too. And there's plenty of science around it. So you can go to Barnes & Noble and you can buy all these books, but we really need the physicians to come to the table and help with behavioral change and engage people in a way that the science tells us is necessary. So change is a process, not an event, and there's 5 changes to change. And understanding where somebody is like the stages of grief. Understanding where somebody is on that line of change will help you design an intervention for them that will work, that they'll get behind. And understand, when was the last time you asked a patient what is their purpose? The reason why that matters is that's what deeply matters to them. That's what will facilitate behavior change. So it is about treating the whole person. And we've always been about that. So I'm excited to be a DO, and I truly, truly, truly think that the future of healthcare is in our hands. Truly.